days after my husband left me for another woman, he was begging at my front door. The same man who once laughed at me, who told me I should be grateful he married me, now stood there pale and shaking, whispering, "Victoria, please, you have to fix this." All because of one phone call I made the night he walked out. You see, Lucas thought he had won. He thought his residency meant he could throw me away and start a new life with someone younger and richer. But Lucas forgot one very important detail, and that mistake was about to destroy everything he had just built. My name is Victoria Lane. I'm 35 years old. A few years ago, I helped the man I loved move across the world so we could start a life together. At the time, I believed I had found someone who truly cared about me. His name was Lucas, and he was 10 years younger than I was. When we first met, he was living in a small, developing country overseas. Life there wasn't easy for him. He often talked about how badly he wanted a better future, a chance to build something more. But we didn't meet in person at first. We met online. It started on Snapchat, with simple conversations, a few messages here and there, then the messages turned into video calls, late-night talks that lasted for hours. Even though we lived in two completely different countries, we slowly started talking every single day, and over time, those conversations became something deeper. At the time, Lucas was only 25, and I'll admit the age difference worried me from the beginning. One night, during an early call, I asked him honestly, "Lucas, don't you think the age gap between us might be a problem?" He immediately shook his head. "Victoria," he said softly, "age doesn't matter to me." Then he smiled in a way that made me feel safe. "I love you for who you are, not for your age." At that moment, I believed him. I believed every single word. You see, I've never been the type of woman who fits society's beauty standards. I'm a little overweight, and my style has always been simple. I prefer comfortable clothes over trendy ones. But Lucas always told me none of that mattered. "I don't care about looks," he would say. "I care about the person." And when we eventually got married, I truly believed I had found someone who loved me exactly the way I was. So after our wedding, Lucas moved to the United States to live with me. At the time, I owned 2 small clothing shops. They weren't huge businesses, but they gave me a comfortable life. And for the first few months after Lucas arrived, everything seemed perfect. He was kind, supportive, loving. Sometimes he even came to the shop with me and helped customers. Those early days made me believe our future would be beautiful. But slowly, something started to change, and at first, it began with small comments. At first, the changes were small, so small that I tried to ignore them. One evening, while we were getting ready to go out, Lucas looked at the dress I was wearing and laughed quietly. "Victoria, this looks a little old-fashioned." I forced a small smile and pretended it didn't bother me. But after that night, comments like that started happening more often. Soon, Lucas wasn't just criticizing my clothes. He began criticizing everything: my weight, my style, even my skin. One night, while we were sitting in the living room, he looked at me carefully, like he was examining something. Then he said something that stayed in my mind for days. "You know, you're getting older now." He shrugged casually. "You should try harder to take care of yourself." At the time, I told myself he was just being honest. So I tried to change. I joined a gym and started dieting. I bought new clothes, modern clothes, the kind I normally would never wear. I even spent money on skincare products and beauty treatments. I was trying to become the woman I thought my husband wanted. But no matter what I did, Lucas was never satisfied. If I dressed up nicely, he would laugh and say I looked ridiculous. If I wore my usual comfortable clothes, he said I looked boring. It felt like nothing I did was ever good enough. And slowly, the criticism turned into something worse: insults. Sometimes he even said things in front of other people. I remember one evening at a small gathering with friends. Everyone was laughing and talking when Lucas suddenly looked at me and joked loudly, "Victoria should be thankful I married her." The room became awkwardly quiet, but Lucas kept going. "If I hadn't married her," he said with a smirk, "she'd probably still be alone." A few people laughed nervously. My face felt hot with embarrassment, but I stayed silent, because deep inside, I still believed things would get better. Lucas worked occasionally, but most of the time he depended on my business income. My clothing stores paid the bills, they paid the rent, they paid for the life we were living. But strangely, that never stopped him from acting like he was the one doing me a favor. During arguments, he sometimes said things that cut deeper than anything else. "You are nothing without me." Or worse, "You should be grateful I chose you." Those words hurt more than I ever admitted. But even then, I kept trying to save the marriage, because I believed love required patience. What I didn't realize was that Lucas was already waiting for something, and the moment it arrived, everything would change. Then, one day, the moment Lucas had been waiting for finally arrived. He received the news that his U.S. residency application had been approved. When he told me, he looked happier than I had ever seen him. That night, he went out with friends to celebrate, talking excitedly about how his life was finally secure. At the time, I truly believed this would bring us closer together. I thought after the stress of immigration was over, our marriage would finally become peaceful again. But I couldn't have been more wrong, because after that approval, Lucas didn't just change a little, he became someone I barely recognized. A few weeks after receiving his conditional residency, it felt like the mask he had been wearing for years suddenly fell off. Before that day, he at least pretended to care about me. Now, he didn't even try. Lucas started going out almost every night. At first, he said it was networking. Then it became meeting friends. Soon, he stopped giving explanations entirely. Sometimes he left the house in the evening and didn't return until 3 or 4 in the morning. Other nights, he didn't come home until sunrise. When I asked where he had been, he would simply shrug. "Relax, Victoria, you worry too much." But the late nights weren't the only thing that changed. Lucas suddenly became very active on social media. Photos began appearing on his Instagram almost every day. Nightclubs, bars, expensive restaurants, and almost every picture included different women. Young women, beautiful women. Sometimes their arms were around him, sometimes he had his arm wrapped around their shoulders. The first time I saw one of those photos, my stomach twisted. When he came home that night, I tried to stay calm. "Lucas," I said quietly, holding up my phone. "Who is this girl?" He looked at the picture for barely a second before laughing. "They're just friends." Then he shook his head like I was being unreasonable. "You're acting jealous again." But one night, I saw something that made my chest feel tight. There was a photo of Lucas dancing in a nightclub with a girl who looked barely 22. When he came home later, I tried one more time to talk to him. "Lucas, maybe we should spend more time together." He looked at me like I had said something ridiculous. "Why?" he replied coldly. "We live in the same house." Then he walked past me, straight to the bedroom. Weeks passed like this. Lucas treated our home like a hotel, a place to sleep, nothing more. And deep down, I could feel something worse was coming. Weeks passed, and the distance between us kept growing. Lucas barely spoke to me anymore. Our house felt less like a home and more like a place he stopped by when he needed sleep. Meanwhile, I kept working long hours at my clothing stores, trying to keep everything together. Sometimes I told myself maybe this was just a phase. Maybe once the excitement of his new freedom faded, things would go back to normal. But deep down, I had a feeling something worse was coming. And one evening, that moment finally arrived. I had just returned from the shop. The house was unusually quiet. I put my bag down, changed my shoes, and sat on the couch trying to relax after a long day. About an hour later, I saw headlights flash through the window. A car had stopped outside. Lucas was back, but the moment I heard the front door open, something felt different, because Lucas wasn't alone. Standing beside him was a young woman. She was tall, confident, and dressed in expensive clothes that looked like they came straight from a luxury boutique. Lucas walked into the house like everything was completely normal. The girl followed him inside, slowly looking around the living room with curious eyes, as if she were exploring a place she might soon belong. For a second, I told myself maybe she was just a guest, maybe a coworker. But then Lucas did something that made my stomach drop. He casually placed his arm around her waist. Then he looked at me completely calm. "Victoria, we need to talk." My heart started beating faster. Something felt terribly wrong. Lucas didn't even sit down. He just stood there beside the girl and said